Thanks, everyone. Terry Trevino here in San Francisco, California. I'm a PhD student at the University of North Dakota, and I'm studying habitat architecture, and in particular, I'm working on developing habitats and making them hardened from high energy particles. That's my dissertation topic. I'm pretty new to the industry. I've only been in the industry for 2 years. Previously, I was in the real estate business and was a real estate entrepreneur, developer, did sales, leasing, you name it. I did everything, and I did that for almost 30 years. I decided to pivot in 2018, and that pivot was to Mars, making myself Mars-centric, at least with respect to my education. I went back to school after 33 years away from school and got my master's in aerospace science with the specialty in space studies, and then I'm pursuing the same at the University of North Dakota. I'm only back 20 days, not even 20 days from the Arctic, which I have to say is probably the most surreal place I've ever been. I'm a mountaineer by training. I've climbed many of the tallest mountains on the planet, and certainly understand the risks associated with being in austere, dangerous environments. And I have to say, the Arctic, definitely bared its teeth, as they say, and it's a place of absolute beauty, purity. Where you step, often that no human has ever stepped. In fact, there's a very, hey, Will, it's likely that no one has ever stepped on many of the places that you walk in the Arctic. Will just joined in. Will's a good friend from UND and a rock star spacesuit designer who just got a really cool job doing that same thing. So anyway, Will, thanks for coming in. I'm going to move into the presentation, and I just, because I'm so excited about showing everyone this, I want to do it now. Flashline Mars. Flashline is a company that's no longer in business. They were bought out by, I don't know, it's one of the big people in the internet business, donkeys years ago. And the reality is we've got a station up in the Arctic that needs another investor, needs another co-owner or sponsor, someone that can really help us kind of get through and be a part of the experience. And to me, the experience is, we're moving out into, and we are definitely going to Mars. And clearly we're going to the moon first in the lunar surface. I'm very keen on working on lunar habitats there as well. But in the meantime, I've made myself Mars-centric and have studied it deeply. One of the things that fascinates the heck out of me in Mars in particular is it's not easy to get to. Nor is Devon Island. Devon Island is equally difficult to get to. Well, not equally, but certainly it took quite the effort, almost Herculean, to get to this view that you see right here. Now, imagine for the moment coloring the sky a bit differently. At that point, you are on the Martian surface. Now, there's not life visible, really, anywhere to speak of. As you look out onto the horizon, there's nothing. But in this, and there's no man-made, human-created, human-centric design anywhere other than you see Starlink there in the right-hand side, and a weather station that did not survive the harsh winter. Crew 15 was our crew. Crew 15 included Andrew Wheeler, geologist from Australia. We were a multinational crew. Myself as a EXO, Olivia Drayson from the UK, also another brilliant scientists that came along with us. Andy Greco, Caleb Poole both work for a very large aerospace company from Seattle. And, honestly, we would get a chance for the most part every day and have either this view or many of the other views I'm getting ready to share with you. But austere in many respects is an understatement. We had to island hop to get there. This is the archipelago. They call it the Arctic archipelago. And here's Devon Island. It's this little, I said to Olivia at one point early on, I said, it looks like it's a little shoe boot. And it kind of reminds me of, that Walter Mitty movie where he goes, I want a shoe boot of beer. And anyway, I digress. But this is Elsamir. Elsamir is an inhabited island, which was just immediately to our north. The North Pole is just a little right there. We were not far. We were about 1,100 kilometer. When you get up that far, it doesn't feel like you're too far from there, and we weren't. We stayed and traversed from down here in Yellowknife, down in the lower left-hand quadrant, and then island hopped along the way. Resolute is right here. Resolute Bay is where we initially stopped and spent the night there, and then traversed over. 40-minute trip. We were there before you knew it. The island itself is massive. It's 3 times the size of the big island of Hawaii. It's got a massive population. Humanity has really taken hold here. 0. And nobody lives there. And there's probably a good reason. The polar bear do live there. The walrus live there. Lemming, which are the tiniest little things you'll ever see. The Arctic wolf is there. But no humans, except for those of us who go every year or will return. Average annual temperature there is negative 16 C. I have to say, when we were there, we did not experience that. This was day 3 of the mission. You can't see. I dropped down a little below the crater rim, so I'm in the crater, and you can get a really good idea of, this looks like a rocket body that it landed. Now, these are visual. They probably do actually help a bit with respect to, keeping it upright and stable, because the winds do come along at quite the clip. I believe a friend of mine in Resolute was telling me that they got up to 70-mile-an-hour winds in February. This was a wind turbine we installed. Probably not the best place to install a wind turbine, but there were other issues that I'll get into with respect to why. But in general, it was not very windy. Again, this is a 180-degree view of the crater. You can see the rim. You can see Olivia standing there. This was before we went into simulation. And that is crater rim to crater rim. And this is the south. This is the southeast or east, and then all the way over to the west. And then on the other side, you can barely get a kind of any visual acuity at all there. It's the other side of the crater. It's massive. It's anywhere from 20 to 24 kilometer in diameter. It's 1.7 kilometer deep. You don't know it until you get into it, and you're like, holy moly. It's never really experienced erosion per se. And that's because there's no rain up there. You get snow, you get ice, but you don't get rain and you don't get flow. This is flow from the ice sheet that's melting there just below the crater rim. And this crater, this asteroid or comet that broke through our atmosphere and became a meteorite, landed 23 million years ago, and in the Miocene period. So honestly, it was quite warm there. You'll get quite a few visual. You'll see some of the evidence of that in a minute here. Although I may not have put those images in. I have hundreds of images, and these were just a few to help me tell the story. Kind of a close-up of the opposite side of the crater rim, and you can kind of get an idea how deep the crater is in this case. It looks barren and dry, and it is. It is Um, it's definitely extreme as environments go. There's part of the crew that's and this is Andrew Wheeler. This is Olivia, and then myself, and then these are the two pilots that flew Moses, and you can kind of see, this was just an amazing piece of equipment, and we'll talk a little about that. This is not the same plane. This is the plane we took from Yellowknife and popped over to Resolute, and this is the plane we took from Resolute to the island. As we flew over, ice shelf was still there. The ice was still in the water, and it was melting. You could see it breaking up quite a bit. But the trip itself took 3 days from Yellowknife to get to Devon Island, and a lot of patience. And so you'll get a real clear understanding of that here in a second. Flashline Mars. This was our first view of it as we flew over. We're about 5 kilometers out, and you can kind of see it on the ridge. This is called Haynes Ridge here as we're approaching. And I'd been vacant for 6 years, going on 6 years. I think by the time we got there, it was 5 years and 11 months. This mission started 18 more than that. It started about, James and I started talking regularly about Flashline in August of 2021, previous to him becoming the executive director. But it was absolutely just something on, not a bucket list, but for me, I needed to be in an extreme environment and understand and feel what Mars might be like. You can only guess as to the condition of the station itself. A very good friend of the Mars Society helped me walk through some of those risks early on, Eleanor Poley, who many of you may know of. And if you're in our industry, she's a brilliant mind, and actually probably, one of the more experienced people in the analog industry, and certainly understands it from a very professional perspective. We did this first flyover just because we wanted to make sure there were no polar bears around, and there weren't, thankfully. But as it is, you can kind of see the ridge of the crater rim. This is the crater rim right here, our fuel depot. And unfortunately, you got to have fossil fuels up there. No choice until we have a field of circular solar panels that rotate with the sun that rotates around literally 360 degrees and never drops. You're going to have that. You do see life when you start looking for it. It's everywhere. These Arctic poppy are brilliant, and I can't zoom in on it, but there's these hairs, if you want to call them. They're stem hairs is what they're literally called. And they collect kind of air, humidity from the air, and as a source of how they survive and live. Almost everywhere we stepped, in some places, you would see these little mini Arctic poppy. But yeah, beautiful. This is called the cushion plant. This is a close-up with an iPhone, if anybody wonders. And it really survives in kind of these wet environments. And so, of course, as the snowfields melt, we get water flow, and we did have a creek nearby that we pulled all of our water from. Pristine, crystal clear water that we tested before. This is the first team picture on Devon Island. We were there, I think we were there about 30 minutes. Brilliant humans, all of them, lots of love. We really do rely on each other in these environments. Most of you may or may not know that, but there was only 5 of us on this absolutely huge, massive island. We were alone. We stood there and watched those planes disappear, and Olivia and I looked at each other and we go, okay, it's just us. And really, if anything were to happen at all, right, and we lost, or someone was injured or something, we would have suffered terribly. And that's just the case in these environments, these extreme environments. Speaking of danger at every turn, Caleb being belayed, you can kind of see he's tied in. He's got multiple spots where he's tied in, but he's up at the top of our comms tower, removing this old fiberglass antenna that just had failed completely, and I'm sure ridiculously high winds. So he was pulling that down and then being belayed by Andy. You can see him there. He was also up on the roof regularly and was up there sealing a bunch of minor leaks that were there. But minor leaks contributed over those many years of it being vacant, that contributed to other issues, and we'll go into that in a second. Safety to me is kind of subconscious, right? And everywhere I looked, I felt like I needed to be safety conscious. And that's maybe the climber and the mountaineer in me, but I never got just desperately comfortable. I was always just a little nervous while I was there. 24 hours a day, I was like that. And so they were up on the station roof sealing and caulking that, and I was shaking in my boots. A little out of place, this slide, but I'll go through it real quick. Cyanobacteria, you heard previously in James's talk. I've been studying algae and propagating algae for 3 years now. I presented my work, I think, almost 2 years ago to the Mars Society. I made myself really Mars specific to what I think algae can do, and James hit on all of those topics, right? It's perfect for ECLIS. As a part of ECLIS, it won't be a sole. It won't actually work on its own in ECLIS. We'll have to have help, but it's a spectacular. Cyanobacteria is just unbelievable. It does unbelievable things. Per the volume, it creates more oxygen than anything on the planet. And when I say volume, I mean if you have a bio bag full of cyanobacteria and you pull the oxygen from it that's being created, you may not need, it's a pretty high volume. You may not need, it could actually probably 1 or 2 people could survive on a small bio bag of what the oxygen they create. I just recently won a NASA grant, and the NASA grant is to use cyanobacteria in its dried pure form as a means of feedstock for row crops on Mars. And I'll be testing that in what we call a random positioning machine, a machine that creates a microgravity environment. I'll be doing that here starting in November, 2 months of that. While we were there, we wanted to see how healthy the algae is, and it came out of nowhere, right? You can see this area, it's actually not too wet. There were other sources that were just weirdly placed and located. Actually, one other source that we found. I was looking at filament length, cell wall size. I was looking at transfer between the individual cells. I don't know if anybody knows, but they line up like little bitty blocks. And each block is its own little cell. They're spectacular things. Oh, I love the way that transitions. Humor. You're not gonna do well up there unless you get a good laugh. We actually there's a lot of good laughs. We had a laugh jar, so to speak, that Andrew kept tabs on. I clearly am not that funny because I came in last place. But in the meantime, even though you're laughing and you've got humor as a means of kind of getting through the stress of the environment itself, you still needed to laugh and have fun. And anyway, I got a kick out of this photo because it's, of course, they're taking the Mickey out of hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. But then behind us, we've got all these amazing logos, which are spectacular. All of these folks have supported the Mars Arctic Research Station. Actually, MARS spells Mars, if anybody knows or wonders. That's the Nunavut flag. And I'll have a thank you to them here in a moment. But yeah, just a beautiful place. We kind of coined ourselves, Olivia and I, and the team overall, the team that broke the mold, because we had to go upstairs and we had to remediate quite a bit of mold that had accumulated from the small roof leaks over the 6 years, and the expansion and the contraction and the freezing and the thawing. And, that's just the natural environment. So we went in full PPE. Actually, this was day 2 or 3 of our work. So I moved into a different type of mask. Olivia was probably the more prudent one in wearing full PPE. But you can see we were always having fun in our James Bond pose there. Before we actually went in, we spent 7 nights outside in these tents. Now, bears are a real thing. We heard from people there in Resolute who'd said that one of the recent Canadian groups that had popped over, and one of the national parks members who'd set up shop for a night on the coast of Devon Island had an actual polar bear encounter. And we were well inland. We were, honestly, there was no reason for a polar bear to be in our area, but we still brought a bear fence. The bear fence is armed with 12 gauge shotgun blanks that will blow your ear off if you're close to them. Thankfully, I never accidentally tripped the wires, but I came really close a few times. And as an example, that's as low as the sun got while we were there. It never got any lower. In fact, it just only got higher. The entire team upstairs, second floor of the habitat, and you can kind of see the individual crew cabins, crew quarters here. So we had a lot of work to do up here so that we could make it to this point, where we could actually sit and visit. It's a great photo of Olivia because we were out on a water run and she had come up and we were just finished, and I just got a great photo of her with this station in the background. We're about a kilometer away, and talk about austere and on your own. Here you are. This is just a beautiful image through and through. The engineers repaired everything. They literally broke everything down to the nuts and bolts in some cases and repaired it, rebuilt it. And Caleb on the left, Andy on the right. This is one of the Arctic Cat. These are 4-wheel scooters you have to drive around in. I call them rovers. I kept calling them rovers, but I guess they're not. They're anyway, they're quad thingies. I don't even know the name of them. That's why I kept calling them rovers. Anyway, they repaired generators. We had 5 generators on site. They repaired 4 of them, had them all running, installed a wind turbine that we brought with us. They installed brand new LED lights in the upstairs part of the habitat, and just generally all subsystems, right? Now, when I say subsystems, I'm talking about, how we remove human waste as well. That was another thing we had to work through. You've seen this image previously. I think James showed that a minute ago, but, leadership in this case, Andrew Wheeler is our leader in this mission, and it takes a lot of different forms. He was diligent. He documented everything by hand, daily progress, went out, geolocated everything. We have lat long on everything that around there that's important, even significant finds. And we have several that I'll show a few of to you here in a bit. And he's just a brilliant geologist. He was always teaching. I have to say, he was always teaching us, and to the end, I'll always be thankful for that. It's a great image because he's sitting there. He did this every morning, and this was the view. So you get out and you look out, and that's the view every day. You're thankful you had those views. Oh, I love that transition. Sorry. This is Olivia way off in the distance, and it's just, you're by yourself. There's nothing else. There's nobody else. We saw 2 birds the entire time. We heard 1 plane, and it was one of the Arctic taxis, I call them, the twin otters, that came over. Well, didn't come over. It was not even close, but you could hear it. That was it. Never heard anything else. And so here you don't see a lot of those little mini flowers. They're there, but you don't see them. And when you look at it, you're like, oh my, there is just devoid of life is what it feels like. But then you start turning stones over and you're like, whoa. areas of life. Stromatolite. So this was one of my number one areas of interest. These stromatolites are cyanobacteria that are fossilized. And this is probably a stromatolite column in millions of years old. Likely each layer has been washed over by a sedimentary layer. And so in between, you've got the sediment, and then you've got algae. That's cyanobacteria that creates that. And yeah, I just was stumbling along and saw it, and our crew geologist who was there with us just said, "Oh my God, you found stromatolites." So we geolocated that. If anybody wants to know, we know where it is, and we might share that with you. Maybe not. This was another algae source, and we call them algal, A-L-G-A-L, mats, that just kind of show up out of nowhere. This is the actual stream that feeds into the Houghton River. And this was just in the middle of nowhere, just coming out from some underground stream and being fed whatever it needs to survive. And this is cyanobacteria in this stream. Well, I mean, Olivia and I could not get enough of this. This was a significant find. So everything there is primarily limestone. Limestone, as it decays through water running over it or air running over it, it emits humid air. It emits CO2. Cyanobacteria thrives in CO2 environments. But there wasn't a lot of any other sources of nutrients for it. When we use and feed algae here in my lab, I feed it with a substance called Xerox. This is 2 milliliter of Xerox, and this Xerox is full of potassium and nitrogen and all these other things that the cyanobacteria need. But you started loading up cyanobacteria in these bio bags on ISS. It's been tested. It was a pretty impressive endeavor, and big consumer of CO2, pound or kilogram per kilogram. It's definitely a high consumer of CO2. Had a full-blown lab. I brought this piece of equipment here. That's my computer. I can't zoom in, but you can get if anybody else can. This is the individual cells. The cell walls themselves are 2 nanometer, approximately 2 nanometer. The division part was about 4 to 5 nanometer. And when we zoomed in on this video, you could see cellular transfer. It was spectacular. Definitely one of the more impressive things I've seen live when I was monitoring algae. We also brought this device here. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but this device here is a fluorescent microscope. And so we were fluorescing things just to get a better look at them. But anyway, you can see Olivia here working away at it. Honestly, without her, we wouldn't have had the methods that we needed to get this work up and running. So thankful for her every day. That's a cool transition. Sorry. This is the team. We were installing these LED lights. So I've got we put LED lights, we clipped them on the bottom of the old lights, and then the lads, Andy and Caleb, ran a brand new wire and actually just put it right up. And before you knew it, as we were there for 3 weeks, it started getting a bit more dark in the evening, and particularly if we had clouds run in. But this is the kitchen area. Kind of see this is all storage, and here we are working away one morning. Another mission directive that we had on the science side was to go and get water samples. So we took source samples of the ice pack. We took source samples of the creek in the area, and then we took samples of the lakes. There's a chain of lakes there. Very interesting how they form. There's a biofilm that forms along the bottom of these areas, these low drainage areas, and that biofilm becomes a source of keeping the water from flowing through what is really just a very hummocky, porous, high porosity soil. I mean, everything. That's why there's no runoff to speak of other than, in some of these areas. But we were looking for nanoplastics. That's a project I've been on for almost a year November. And these nanoplastics are going to be the end of us if we don't figure some things out. So we've got our work cut out for us. And here we are towards the end of the mission. This is Olivia on top of an iceberg that was up against the coast. And so we popped out on it and everybody took photos of it. This was the old Inuit home. This was a replica. It was remade by one of the Canadian universities, but they actually this would have been covered with whale hide, and then they would enter here, and then this was where they lived. And talk about people living in the most extreme environments ever, and surviving and thriving. We can learn a lot from the Inuit and in particular that entire community. Lastly, this was the last image. We did leave the flag up. It will likely be gone when we return, but because it'll be blown away. But planned return next summer. We've got unfinished business there. I myself have unfinished business there. If James gives me that opportunity, I'm going back, and I just want to thank him. And certainly if anybody has any questions about analogs in general, I have over 60 days in analog environments. And that's me locked in places and in simulation. So happy to discuss what that does to your mental capacity. I'm kidding. It's not bad at all. But reach me anytime or just pop over to the Mars Society and we'll have more information in the next few weeks. A friend of mine said, "Hey, way to go. You made it to Mars." Put my face in there. Thanks to the Mars Society, the Nunavut themselves, the government, were desperately helpful. We didn't get our permits to go down into their land. We will have those next year. But we do acknowledge that this land is their land. And we will always be good stewards. And thanks to Dr. Zubrin. He was very supportive of me almost 2 years ago. Dr. Rupert as well, a good friend. James, Eleanor, Roger Gilbertson. He was the one that came up with the Starlink. Sam Ross, another engineer who was out on our mission control team, MCC. But let me tell you, Starlink made a massive difference. And that's it. I'll stop sharing.